Hello, this is my reading, trying out my new earpieces for microphone, of Satyrica. The first chapter of which is called Agamemnon, as told by Encolpius. I have to wonder, I said, is there some twibe of furies that makes you professors of rhetoric blather on like this? These wounds I received for our common liberty, this the eye I lost for you. Please, will someone lead me to my children? I can scarcely walk on these battle-scarred legs. Even this patriotic pap might be bearable if it cleared the path to real eloquence. Hardly. The bloated content and empty posturing have only one result. When the students actually go to court, they think they've landed on another planet. Why are young minds so completely stultified? In college, because they neither hear nor see anything they can use. Instead, they study pirates wielding chains on a beach, tyrants ordering sons to decapitate their own fathers, oracles that require the sacrifice of at least 3 virgins fend off a plague, sticky gobs of speech, and every word and deed slathered with poppy and sesame seeds. Whoever grows up on this stuff will be about as tasteful as someone who lives in a kitchen is fragrant. With all due respect, Agamemnon, the decay of eloquence started with you rhetoricians. Your cult of euphony has made speech into a pointless game, while the body of eloquence has shriveled up and died. Young men weren't confined to rhetorical exercises when Sophocles or Euripides were shaping the language. No gloomy grammarians had annihilated our native wit when Pindar and the 9 lyric poets shrank from singing Homer's songs. But the poets were not alone. I'm not aware of Plato or Demosthenes ever having enrolled in fundamentals of rhetoric. Great oratory is, if you will, modest, not flashy or artificial. It flourishes on natural elegance. But that flatulent, inflated magniloquence, later imported from Asia at Athens, has infected every aspiring writer like a pestilential breeze. When standards fall, eloquence falls silent. Who has even approached the greatness of Thucydides, the glory of Eperides? Nor does poetry look any healthier. No. Everything, if fed on the same unwholesome diet, wilts before it matures. Not even painting resisted the general rot after the Egyptians had the brass to come up with their shortcut to great art. Agamemnon was not about to let me sound off in the portico any longer than he had spent sweating inside the college. "Young man," he said, "since your speech shows unusual taste and even more remarkably a measure of good sense, I won't try to deceive you about the tricks of the trade, but it is really surprising that the professors engage in these admittedly preposterous performances given the lunatics they work for. As the great Cicero once observed, if teachers don't cater to their students, they'll be the only ones left in school. Like the parasites in comedy wangling dinner from rich hosts who think only of what will appeal to their patrons, for they won't get what they want if they don't lay some traps for the ear. The professor of rhetoric is like a fisherman. If he doesn't bait his hook with something he knows the little fish like, he'll sit on his rock all day without a nibble. What can we do? It's the parents who deserve your outrage. They don't want their children to get a serious education. First of all, they sacrifice their hopes, like everything else, to their ambition. They're in such a hurry they push the neophytes into court and thrust rhetoric, which they claim to admire enormously, of course, into students still wet behind the ears. If only they would let the students proceed gradually. Then eager students should cultivate their taste for serious reading and form their souls on the precepts of wisdom. Then they might learn how to rummage for just the right word and to listen for hours to the masters they would emulate. They might even discover that to please a puerile palate is no great accomplishment. Then the noble art of oratory could regain the authority conferred by greatness. Instead, boys play through school and as young men get laughed out of court. But, worst of all, even in old age they won't admit what a shoddy education they received. Not that I have anything against a little home-down improvisation in the style of old Lucilius. In fact, I will show you what I mean in a verse. Wanted. To learn a serious art, to nurture greatness in the heart, smooth first the soul with rectitude, forget the court's hauteur, the rude dull host's repast, no fitting place for one to brew one's own disgrace in borrowed wine. No worthy cause to sell the clown one's canned applause. Whether the citadel of Athens be his home, or where the Spartan farmer dwells, or the siren's haunt, let him devote his first years to the Muses, and drink his happy fill at the Maeonian fount. Once he's stuffed with Socrates and his kind, give him free rein, let him brandish the weapons of giant Demosthenes. After that, let a cohort of Romans surround him, and let them free his taste from Greek mastery. Next, let his writing cast off the forum's constraints, and in its swift career let his fortune sound notes all its own. Let his words serve up banquets and battles in a savage chant, and in threatening echoes of mighty Cicero, charged with these arts as if from a bottomless hell. You will spill speech sublime from the depths of your soul. As I was listening so intently to Agamemnon, I didn't notice that Ascletus was already gone. As I walked along, absorbed in our heated conversation, a vast throng of students had burst in at the portico. Apparently they just heard the speaker after Agamemnon give an extemporaneous performance. While the students laughed at his sententious style and ridiculed his entire presentation, I managed to sneak away and took off at a trot after Ascletus. But I lost my way somehow and had no idea where our lodgings were. Every turn I took led me back to the same spot until, out of breath and soaked with sweat, I approached an old woman selling vegetables. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said. "You wouldn't happen to know where I'm staying, would you?" Charmed by the polite delivery of my foolish query, she replied, "Of course," and promptly got up and led the way. I thought she must be divine. Suddenly, just as we entered an unfamiliar part of town, this streetwise woman threw back a motley curtain and announced, "You ought to live here." I was about to say I'd never laid eyes on the place when I glimpsed a line of naked oars, with some customers prowling round them. I began to grasp, all too slowly, that I'd been led right into a cat house. I cursed the woman's tricks, tried to hide my face, and dashed across the room. But when I reached the doorway, I ran smack into Ascyltus. As dead tired as I was, you'd have thought he had the same guide. I greeted him with a laugh and asked how he ended up in the dive. Wiping away the sweat with both hands, he said, "If you only knew what I had been through." "What now?" I asked. "Well," he sighed, as if too tired to speak, "I was wandering all over town and couldn't even find our lodgings until a fatherly old man came up and kindly offered to lead the way. He brought me here by some roundabout route and then offered to pay me for a quickie. A madam had already collected for the room, and this guy had his arm around me. If I hadn't been stronger than he was, well, I would have had to pay the price." Everyone there looked to me as if they'd drunk Satyrian. We joined forces and defied the troublemaker. As if in an haze, I spotted Guyton standing at the edge of a path and rushed towards him. When I asked my lover what my lover had gotten us for lunch, the boy sat down on the bed and brushed away a stream of tears with his thumb. Troubled at my lover's state, I asked what was wrong. He didn't want to tell me at first, but when I started to get angry, he opened up. "That lover of yours," he said, "your buddy just came into our room a minute ago and wanted to have me there and then. When I started to scream, he pulled a knife on me and said, 'If you want to play Lucretia, you found your Tarquin.'" When I heard this, I shook my fist in Ascyltus's face. "What about it, you male slut, you with foul breath to match?" Ascyltus pretended to be shocked at first, but a moment later was shaking his fists and shouting even more loudly than I had. "Just shut up," he said, "you filthy gladiator. No, even the arena didn't want you. Just shut up, you sneaking cutthroat. Why, you couldn't even make it with a decent woman when you had the strength. Didn't I play lover in the garden, just as this boy does now in the inn?" I shot back. "You slunk off while I was talking to the professor." "What am I supposed to do, stupid? Starve to death? Or listen to those pompous epigrams? I'd rather hear bottles broken and dreams interpreted. For God's sake, you're far more shameless than I am, the way you kissed that poet's ass to cop a free dinner." So, our ugly quarrel ended in gales of laughter, and we turned calmly to the business at hand. But I couldn't forget what he had done. "Ascyltus," I said, "it's obvious that we can't get along. Let's split up our things and try to fight off poverty in our own way. You're a scholar, and so am I. But to stay out of your way, I'll try something else. Otherwise, we'll quarrel 1,000 times a day and scandalise the old town." Ascyltus had to admit I was right. "Since we're invited out as scholars tonight, let's not ruin the evening. But tomorrow I'll be more than happy to find my own place and another lover." "Gratification delayed is gratification denied," I quipped. Lust was the cause of this hurried separation. I've been wanting to get rid of that obnoxious chaperone so Guyton and I could live as before. I looked the old town over for myself before returning to our little room. At last I could ask for kisses without looking over my shoulder. I held Guyton snug in my arms and was just on the verge of enjoying the most enviable of pleasures. The party was just beginning when Ascyltus slunk up to the room, forced the bar from the door and caught us in the act. He filled the little room with his laughter and mock applause when he pulled off the cloak that covered me. Well, 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 what have we here, my right honourable friend? Isn't this tent a bit small for two, soldier? He didn't stop there either, but grabbed a strap from his bag and proceeded to give me a good thorough thrashing while tossing out taunts like salt on a wound. Aren't friends supposed to hold all things in common? It was just beginning to get dark when we entered the market. There were lots of things for sale, junk for the most obvious part, but the failing light helped to obscure their dubious origins. Since we had the stolen cloak with us, we took advantage of this opportunity to display its border in a corner of the market in the hope that the splendid material might attract a buyer. Almost immediately, a peasant, who looked strangely familiar, walked up with a young woman and began to eye our cloak very carefully. Ascyltus looked him up and down, then suddenly paled and fell silent. Even I couldn't look at him without rubbing my eyes. Of course, this had to be the guy who found our tunic in the middle of nowhere. Yes, this was the guy. But Ascyltus couldn't believe his eyes, and before doing anything rash, walked over like a prospective buyer, lifted the tunic off the man's shoulders and fingered it carefully. What a marvellous piece of luck. So far the Hick's meddlesome paws hadn't touched the seam. Indeed, he proffered it with some distaste, like a beggar's leavings. When Ascyltus saw that our money had not been touched, and what a rube the seller was, he pulled me aside. Brother, do you not realise the treasure I was grumbling about has come home again? That little tunic still looks chock full of gold. What are we going to do? How can we reclaim our property legally? I was elated, not just because of the treasure, but because I was now relieved of an ugly suspicion. I was against doing anything devious. I thought we should sue him openly. Then if he refused to restore our property, he would find himself facing a court injunction. But Ascyltus feared the law. Who in the world knows us here? He asked. Who will believe our story? We're much better off if we simply buy it. Even if it is ours, we get back our treasure for a few coins instead of risking it in a lawsuit. Where cash alone is king, what good are laws? Where no poor man can ever win his cause. The cynics, though they put the times to shame, will now and then for pennies throw the game. While law's official guardian sell her dear, the judge is proceeding as the auctioneer. Problem was that except for a single coin, which we would have spent on beans, we were empty-handed. We couldn't let the booty escape, so we decided to undersell our cloak and accept a little loss for a greater gain. As soon as we unfolded our wares, the woman with her head covered, who had been standing with the peasant, inspected some marks on the cloak very carefully before grabbing it firmly in both hands and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop the thieves!" We were caught completely off guard, but instead of standing there looking stupid, we grabbed that rag of a tunic and shouted back with equal fervour that they were the thieves. The argument was absurd. Street dealers attracted by the uproar naturally ridiculed our perverse insistence. While we were laying claim to a rag not worth patching, our rivals were after an obviously costly piece of clothing. At this point, Ascyltus managed to quell the laughter, saying, "Look, everyone likes his own things best. Let them return our tunic and they may have their cloak." The trade was fine all round, but there were already some shady lawyers on hand who wanted to profit from our cloak. They pressed us to deposit both articles with them so that a judge could settle the dispute the next day. There was not, after all, only the issue of ownership at stake. They insisted, but the fact that we were all under suspicion of theft. They were already appointing trustees, some street dealer, bald on top with a forehead positively bristling with warts. He had pled some cases, he said, as he seized our cloak as Exhibit A for the coming trial. The aim of all this was clear enough: to let a pack of thieves get a stranglehold on our cloak in the belief that we would not appear at the appointed time for fear of being charged with a crime. We were obviously after the same thing, and chance helped us both get what we wanted. When we demanded that the old tunic be treated as evidence, the peasant flew off the handle and threw it in Ascyltus's face. He wanted us to forget the old thing and for us to return the cloak which had started all the trouble. With the treasure retrieved, as we thought then, we raced back to our rooms, shut the door and had a good laugh at the wiles of those street dealers and conmen who so shrewdly recovered our money for us. I like succeeding by degrees. Too easy spoils the victories.